An alien outcry. You caged human children? Humanity will never forgive. The emergency council chamber of the Galactic Federation buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from 47 species gathered in unprecedented haste. Ambassador Zeth Ka of the Andromedans called the session to order, his crystalline form shimmering with anxiety. The reason for this gathering was unlike anything the Federation had faced in its 1,000-year history. Captain Sarah Chen stood before the assembled aliens, her human frame appearing small, yet radiating an intensity that made even the largest delegates shift uncomfortably. Behind her, holographic evidence floated in the air, displaying images that had shocked the galaxy to its core. The footage showed children, human children, locked in energy cages on the remote mining colony of Kepler 442b. "Honorable delegates," Captain Chen began, her voice steady despite the rage burning in her eyes. 3 days ago, we discovered what can only be described as the most heinous violation of galactic law in recorded history. The Vorthak Consortium has been using human children as forced laborers in their dilithium mines. A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. The Vorthak representative, a hulking creature with 6 arms and scaled hide, remained silent, but his breathing had quickened noticeably. "These children," Chen continued, manipulating the hologram to show closer images, "range in age from 6 to 14 Earth years. They were taken from human colonies during what the Vorthak claimed were routine trade negotiations. Instead of the promised cultural exchanges, these innocents were shipped to a prison world and forced to work 18-hour shifts in dangerous mining conditions." Ambassador Zeth Ka's crystalline form flickered with distress patterns. "Captain Chen, while these allegations are serious, we must follow proper procedures. Has humanity filed formal charges?" Chen's laugh was bitter. "Formal charges? Ambassador, when you cage children and force them to mine radioactive materials with their bare hands, you've moved beyond the realm of diplomatic procedure." She gestured to the hologram showing a young girl, no more than 8, carrying a basket of glowing ore twice her size. The Altarian delegate, a graceful being with silver skin and elongated limbs, spoke up. "Captain, the Vorthak Consortium has been a valued member of our trade alliance for centuries. Surely there must be some misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Chen's voice rose slightly. "We have video evidence, survivor testimonies, and physical proof. 347 human children were imprisoned on that world. We've rescued them all, but the damage has been done. Some may never recover from what they endured." She pressed a control, and new images appeared showing children with radiation burns, malnourished bodies, and eyes that had seen too much. The chamber fell into stunned silence. The Vorthak representative finally spoke, his voice a deep rumble that translated through universal communicators. "The humans exaggerate. These were voluntary workers in a legitimate mining operation. They were fed and sheltered." Captain Chen turned slowly to face the Vorthak delegate, her expression deadly calm. "Voluntary? The youngest is 6 years old. She volunteered to carry radioactive ore that burns through protective equipment." She activated another hologram showing a child's hands covered in radiation sores. "This little girl volunteered to lose 3 fingers to mining accidents." The evidence was overwhelming. Medical scans showed systematic abuse, malnutrition, and exposure to dangerous levels of radiation. Psychological evaluations revealed trauma that would take years to heal. The rescued children spoke of friends who had died in the mines, of punishment chambers for those who couldn't meet their quotas, of a systematic operation designed to exploit the most vulnerable members of humanity. Ambassador Zeth Ka attempted to maintain order as angry murmurs spread through the chamber. Many species present had their own young, and the images of human children suffering struck a universal chord of horror. "The Federation will investigate these claims thoroughly. Zethka announced. In the meantime, we ask all parties to remain calm while proper procedures are followed. Captain Chen stepped forward, her eyes scanning the assembled delegates. With all due respect, Ambassador, this is not a matter for investigation. This is a matter for justice. The evidence is clear, irrefutable, and documented. The Vorthak Consortium committed crimes against children, crimes against innocence itself. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. But this isn't just about what happened to these children. This is about what happens next. How the galaxy responds to this atrocity will define us all. The Epsilon Eridani representative, a being resembling a large insect with multifaceted eyes, clicked nervously. Captain Chen, what exactly is humanity's position regarding this matter? Chen's smile was cold as winter on a dead world. Humanity's position is simple. We want the individuals responsible for this operation handed over for trial. We want reparations for the survivors, and we want guarantees that nothing like this will ever happen again. And if the Federation cannot provide these assurances, asked the Altarian delegate, then humanity will provide them ourselves, Chen replied quietly. We've already frozen all trade agreements with any species that continues to do business with the Vorthak Consortium. Our merchant fleets have been recalled from Vorthak space. And our military is currently surrounding every Vorthak installation within 50 light years of human territory. The chamber erupted in alarmed voices. The implications were staggering. Humanity, despite being one of the newer members of the galactic community, had become a significant economic and military force. Their technology, while different from traditional galactic designs, had proven remarkably effective. A human embargo could cripple entire sectors of the galactic economy. You threaten economic warfare over a mining dispute? The Vorthak delegate growled. Chen turned to face him directly, and for a moment, the temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. This was not a mining dispute. This was slavery. This was torture. This was the systematic abuse of children. Her voice carried a weight that made even the largest delegates uncomfortable. And if you think humanity will ever forget what you did to our young, you understand nothing about our species. The holographic displays around the chamber continued to cycle through images of the rescued children. Some delegates looked away, unable to bear the sight of such suffering. Others stared in growing horror as the full scope of the Vorthak operation became clear. The children spoke of others, Chen continued, her voice cutting through the nervous chatter. Other species young who were processed through the same system, Andromedan juveniles, young Altarians, even Epsilon Eridani larvae. This wasn't just an attack on humanity. It was an attack on childhood itself. This revelation sent shockwaves through the chamber. Representatives began frantically checking their own missing persons reports, cross-referencing disappearances with known Vorthak trade routes. Ambassador Zethka's crystalline form pulsed with distress colors. If what you're saying is true, then this represents a systematic violation of the most fundamental laws of our civilization. It is true, Chen confirmed. We have the children. We have their testimonies. We have the evidence of their suffering. And now we have a choice. We can allow the bureaucratic machinery of the Federation to slowly grind through procedures while the perpetrators destroy evidence and escape justice. Or we can act swiftly to ensure that justice is served and such horrors never happen again. The Vorthak delegate shifted uncomfortably in his specialized seat. The consortium operates under established trade protocols. Any irregularities can be addressed through proper channels. Irregularities? Chen's voice carried disbelief. You're calling child slavery an irregularity? She activated a new set of images showing the mining facilities where the children had been held. The conditions were appalling, with cramped quarters, inadequate food supplies, and safety equipment clearly designed for adult workers forced onto young bodies. These children worked in tunnels barely 3 feet high because you designed them specifically to exploit beings their size. You fed them subsistence rations that would have been considered torture even for adult prisoners. You exposed them to radiation levels that would kill most species within months. Chen's voice remained controlled, but there was an underlying current of fury that made the chamber's environmental system struggle to maintain atmospheric equilibrium. The evidence was methodical and devastating: purchase orders for child-sized equipment, communication logs discussing the efficiency advantages of young workers, medical reports showing the deliberately minimal care provided to injured children, financial records proving the enormous profits generated by this exploitation. As the presentation continued, more delegates began to understand the true scope of what had occurred. This wasn't a case of neglect or poor oversight. This was a carefully planned and executed operation designed specifically to exploit children for maximum profit. The Andromedan delegates' crystalline form began displaying patterns of deep distress. "Captain Chen, if our young ones are indeed among the victims, we pledge our full support for any action humanity deems necessary." Similar declarations began coming from other species as they realized their own children might have been victimized by the same operation. The chamber, which had begun the session divided on humanity's aggressive stance, was rapidly shifting toward unified outrage. The Vorthak representative attempted to regain control of the narrative. These accusations lack proper context. The mining operation was a legitimate business venture operating under established trade agreements. Any claims of mistreatment are greatly exaggerated. Chen had been waiting for this response. She activated a final holographic display, this one showing a recording taken directly from the mining facility's own security systems. The footage showed Vorthak supervisors using shock weapons on children who moved too slowly, forcing injured youngsters back to work, and disposing of the bodies of those who had died from exhaustion or radiation exposure. The chamber fell into absolute silence as the recording played. Even the most hardened military delegates found themselves unable to watch as children barely old enough to walk were forced into dangerous mining shafts. When the recording ended, Captain Chen's voice carried the weight of absolute moral authority. "This is who the Vorthak Consortium is. This is what they chose to do to our children. And this is why humanity will never, ever forgive." The implications hung heavy in the air. Humanity had entered the galactic community with a reputation for being reasonable, adaptable, and eager to learn. They had been model citizens, contributing technology, culture, and resources to the greater good. But this revelation had awakened something primal in the human response, something that reminded the galaxy why humanity had emerged from a world where apex predators competed for survival. Ambassador Zeth Ka struggled to maintain order as delegates began demanding immediate action. The careful diplomatic protocols that had governed galactic civilization for millennia were crumbling in the face of such overwhelming evidence of systematic child abuse. The session would continue, but already the outcome was clear. The galaxy had been forced to confront a truth it had preferred to ignore, that the very foundations of their civilization could be corrupted when profit was valued over the protection of innocence. And now they would have to face the consequences of that corruption, with humanity leading the charge for justice. Alien Outcry. You caged human children? Humanity will never forgive. Second part. The emergency session had been adjourned for 6 hours, but the Federation Council chambers remained active throughout the night cycle. Emergency communications flooded in from across the galaxy as word of the Vorthak atrocities spread. What had begun as a formal complaint was rapidly evolving into the greatest crisis in galactic civilization's history. Admiral Marcus Webb arrived on the Federation station aboard the human flagship Retribution, accompanied by a fleet of 27 vessels that had seemingly materialized from nowhere. The human military response was swift, coordinated, and unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. While other species required weeks or months to mobilize their forces, humanity had deployed a full battle group within 72 hours of discovering the mining operation. The rescued children were aboard the medical vessel Hippocrates, receiving treatment from the galaxy's finest xenobiological specialists. But even as their physical wounds began to heal, their testimonies painted an even darker picture of the Vorthak operation than initially revealed. Dr. Elena Vasquez, humanity's chief xenopsychologist, presented her preliminary findings to an expanded council that now included representatives from 18 additional species whose young had been identified among the victims. Her report was clinical in its precision, but devastating in its implications. The psychological conditioning employed by the Vorthak was systematic and sophisticated, Dr. Vasquez explained, her voice steady despite the horror of her findings. Children were deliberately separated from others of their own species to prevent the formation of support networks. They were taught that their families had abandoned them, that they were worthless except for their labor, and that resistance would only bring more suffering. The holographic displays showed psychological profiles of the rescued children, their trauma mapped in precise detail. The damage went far beyond physical abuse. The Vorthak had employed techniques designed to break the spirit, to create compliant workers who would never think to rebel or seek escape. The most disturbing finding, Dr. Vasquez continued, is that this conditioning was species-specific. The Vorthak had studied the psychological vulnerabilities of each race they targeted. They knew exactly how to break human children, how to destroy Andromedan juveniles, how to crush the spirit of young Altarians. Ambassador Zeth Ka's crystalline form pulsed with increasingly distressed patterns. Dr. Vasquez, are you suggesting this was a coordinated effort spanning multiple species? I'm not suggesting it, Ambassador. I'm stating it as fact. The Vorthak Consortium operated a systematic child trafficking network that spanned at least 12 sectors and involved the capture and exploitation of young beings from 23 different species. The scope of the revelation struck the chamber like a physical blow. This wasn't an isolated incident of poor judgment. This was an organized criminal enterprise that had operated under the Federation's nose for decades. Admiral Webb stepped forward, his bearing reflecting decades of military service. The evidence we've gathered suggests the Vorthak have been operating this network for at least 30 years. Conservative estimates indicate they've processed over 10,000 children through their facilities. 10,000 children. The number hung in the air like a curse. Delegates who had been willing to consider diplomatic solutions began to understand the true magnitude of what they were facing. Admiral, the Epsilon Eridani representative clicked nervously. What is humanity's current military posture regarding this situation? Webb's smile was razor-thin. We've positioned forces at every known Vorthak facility in 3 sectors. Their trading ships are being interdicted and searched. Any vessel found to contain imprisoned children will be seized immediately. The Vorthak delegate, who had remained silent since the evidence presentation, finally spoke. This is an act of war against a sovereign consortium. The Federation will not stand for such aggression. Captain Chen, who had remained quiet during the medical presentations, stepped forward. Her expression was calm. But there was something predatory in her posture that made the larger aliens instinctively step back. War? She asked quietly. You think this is war? She activated a new display showing the current positions of human vessels. Red dots surrounded every known Vorthak installation like antibodies surrounding an infection. This isn't war. War implies you have something to fight back with. The tactical display revealed the true scope of humanity's response. While the Federation had been debating procedures, the humans had moved with military precision to completely isolate the Vorthak Consortium. Their trade routes were cut, their facilities surrounded, and their fleet effectively bottled up in their home system. How did you deploy so quickly? Asked the Altarian delegate, genuine curiosity mixing with growing alarm. Admiral Webb exchanged a look with Captain Chen before responding. "We've been preparing for this possibility since we joined the Federation. Not specifically the Vorthak situation, but the potential need to protect human interests independently of galactic bureaucracy." This admission sent shockwaves through the chamber. The implication was clear. Humanity had been building a shadow military capability far beyond what they had declared to Federation authorities. "You've been secretly militarizing?" Ambassador Zeth Ka's distress patterns reached critical levels. "We've been preparing to defend ourselves and our interests," Chen corrected. "Given what we've discovered, that preparation appears to have been justified." The rescued children's testimonies revealed more than just physical and psychological abuse. They spoke of other facilities, other operations, other victims who hadn't been as fortunate. The Vorthak network extended throughout multiple sectors, with connections to legitimate businesses that provided cover for their activities. Young Sarah Martinez, barely 9 years old, described her experience with a clarity that chilled the chamber. Her words, translated through child-friendly interfaces, painted a picture of industrial-scale suffering that defied comprehension. "They told us our parents sold us because we weren't worth keeping," she said, her voice small but steady. "They said we should be grateful they gave us work to do. When Jenny got sick from the glowing rocks, they said it was her fault for being weak." Jenny, it emerged, had been an Andromedan juvenile whose crystalline structure had been irreparably damaged by radiation exposure. She had died in the mines 3 months before the rescue operation. The testimonies continued throughout the session, each one adding another layer of horror to an already overwhelming picture. Children spoke of friends who had disappeared, of punishment cells where uncooperative workers were left in darkness, of supervisors who seemed to take pleasure in their suffering. But alongside the horror stories came accounts of remarkable resilience. The children had formed support networks despite the Vorthak's efforts to isolate them. Older children had protected younger ones, sharing food and comfort in defiance of their captors' rules. They had maintained hope despite overwhelming evidence that no rescue was coming. Dr. Vasquez's analysis revealed that this resilience was itself a form of resistance that the Vorthak had failed to break. The children maintained their essential identity despite systematic attempts at psychological destruction. They remembered their names, their families, their cultures. In many ways, they saved themselves before we could save them. This resilience, however, came at a terrible cost. Many of the children would require years of therapy to recover from their trauma. Some had been exposed to radiation levels that would cause long-term health problems. Others had suffered injuries that would affect them for the rest of their lives. The financial records seized from Vorthak facilities revealed the economic scope of their operation. Child labor had generated profits exceeding 200 billion Federation credits over the past decade. The money had been laundered through legitimate businesses and invested in expanding the network of trafficking operations. Admiral Webb presented intelligence showing how the profits were distributed. The Vorthak Consortium reinvested 60% of their child labor profits into expanding their trafficking network. They purchased children from corrupt officials, trafficked them through supposedly legitimate transport companies, and processed them through facilities disguised as standard mining operations. The sophisticated nature of the operation required resources and connections far beyond what a single consortium could manage independently. Investigation revealed a network of collaborators spread throughout multiple species and sectors. They had inside information about Federation shipping schedules, Webb continued. They knew which inspections were coming and when. They had safe passage agreements with corrupt officials. This wasn't a rogue operation. This was systematic corruption that reached into the highest levels of galactic commerce. As the evidence mounted, more species stepped forward with their own horror stories. The Centaurians revealed that an entire generation of their young had been declared missing during exploration missions that were actually Vorthak trafficking operations. The Tau Ceti Confederation admitted that they had suspected something was wrong, but had been afraid to investigate due to the economic power of the Vorthak Consortium. The Federation was facing the collapse of everything it claimed to represent. The principles of protection for the innocent, justice for the oppressed, and cooperation between species were revealed as facades hiding systematic exploitation of the most vulnerable members of galactic society. Captain Chen addressed this reality directly. The Federation failed these children. Your investigations failed them. Your oversight failed them. Your justice system failed them. The only thing that saved them was direct action by people willing to act outside your system. Her words stung because they were true. While diplomatic protocols demanded lengthy investigations and careful procedures, hundreds of children had continued to suffer in Vorthak facilities. If humanity hadn't acted unilaterally, those children might still be trapped in the mines. The Vorthak delegate made one final attempt to control the narrative. These accusations are based on testimony from traumatized children and manipulated evidence. The consortium demands a fair hearing before neutral arbitrators. The chamber erupted in angry responses from 24 species. The evidence was overwhelming, the testimonies were corroborated by physical proof, and the scope of the network was documented beyond any reasonable doubt. Admiral Webb's response was cold and final. You'll get your fair hearing, but it will be in a human court, under human law, with human judges who understand that the systematic abuse of children is not a matter for negotiation. The implications were clear. Humanity was no longer interested in Federation justice. They were prepared to impose their own standards of accountability, backed by military force that had proven capable of neutralizing the Vorthak threat within days. As the session moved toward its inevitable conclusion, the galaxy was forced to confront uncomfortable truths about its own moral foundations. The Federation had allowed systematic child abuse to flourish for decades under the guise of trade freedom and diplomatic courtesy. Now they would have to live with the consequences of that failure, as humanity demonstrated what justice looked like when it was backed by the will to act rather than the comfort of endless procedure. Alien Outcry. You caged human children? Humanity will never forgive. Final part. 3 months after the Federation session that had changed everything, the galaxy was a very different place. The Vorthak Consortium no longer existed as a functioning entity. Their assets had been seized, their leadership arrested, and their vast network of child trafficking operations dismantled with surgical precision. Humanity had kept their word with ruthless efficiency, working with a coalition of 26 species whose children had been victimized. They had systematically eliminated every aspect of the trafficking network. But this wasn't the end of their response. It was only the beginning. The trial of Vorthak leadership had been a watershed moment for galactic civilization. Held on New Geneva, humanity's judicial capital, the proceedings had been broadcast throughout the galaxy, with full translation for every known species. The testimony of victims, the presentation of evidence, and the final verdicts had shown the galaxy what real justice looked like. Judge Patricia Coleman, presiding over the tribunal, had delivered sentences that sent shock waves throughout galactic society. The systematic abuse of children represents the ultimate betrayal of civilization's most fundamental principle, the protection of innocence. This court sentences Vorthak Prime and his co-conspirators to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. But the trials had revealed something that disturbed many Federation species, even more than the original crimes: humanity's capacity for righteous fury when their young were threatened. The efficiency with which they had dismantled the Vorthak operation suggested a species capable of extraordinary violence when properly motivated. Admiral Webb stood on the observation deck of the New Geneva orbital facility, watching as construction continued on humanity's most ambitious project. The Children's Protection Initiative was transforming an entire star system into a massive network of rescue, rehabilitation, and education facilities designed to help trafficked children from across the galaxy. The psychological recovery programs are showing remarkable success, Dr. Vasquez reported, joining the Admiral at the viewport. Children who we thought might never heal are beginning to smile again. They're learning to trust, to play, to simply be children. The facilities below were marvels of both engineering and compassion. The humans had combined their advanced technology with insights from dozens of species to create environments perfectly suited to each type of rescued child. Andromedan juveniles had crystalline gardens that helped their structures heal. Altarian young were provided with the specific light frequencies they needed for healthy development. Every detail had been carefully considered. "What's the current count of rescued children?" Webb asked. 4,372 so far, Vasquez replied. "The investigation teams are still finding new facilities. Every Vorthak computer we crack reveals more locations, more victims." The investigation had expanded far beyond the original mining operations. Humanity's intelligence services, working with allied species, had uncovered a network of trafficking operations that spanned half the galaxy. Children had been used not just for mining, but for manufacturing, agriculture, entertainment, and worse purposes that the investigators struggled to document without losing their sanity. Captain Chen entered the observation deck, her expression grim. She carried a datapad containing the latest intelligence reports, and her bearing suggested the news wasn't good. "We found them," she announced without preamble. "The missing Rigelian colony children, all 347 of them." The Rigelian colony disappearance had been a mystery for 2 years. An entire settlement's worth of children had vanished during what appeared to be a routine evacuation. The Federation had assumed they had been lost in a transport accident. "Where?" Webb's voice was deadly quiet. "Industrial processing facility in the Vega sector. They were being used for manufacturing work in zero-G environments. The Vorthak were selling them to legitimate companies as specialized workers with unique size advantages." The implications were staggering. This meant that major galactic corporations had been knowingly using child labor, hiding behind legal language and willful ignorance. The network of complicity extended far beyond the Vorthak consortium itself. "How many companies were involved?" Dr. Vasquez asked, though her expression suggested she dreaded the answer. 37 confirmed so far," Chen replied, "including some of the Federation's most respected manufacturers. They knew they were buying children, but the legal paperwork classified them as compact workers or specialized personnel." The revelation threatened to tear apart the economic foundations of galactic civilization. If major corporations had been built on child labor, the implications for trade, employment, and economic stability were catastrophic. Admiral Webb's response was swift and uncompromising. "Issue warrants for the arrest of every corporate executive involved. Freeze all assets of every company that participated. And send a message to every government in the galaxy: harboring child traffickers is an act of war against humanity." This wasn't diplomatic language. This was humanity serving notice that they would no longer tolerate the systematic abuse of children anywhere in the galaxy, regardless of the political or economic consequences. The Federation's response to humanity's expanding investigation had been mixed. Progressive species like the Andromedans and Altarians had fully supported the human initiative, contributing resources and personnel to the rescue operations. But more conservative elements within the Federation saw humanity's unilateral action as a dangerous precedent. Ambassador Zeth Ka arrived at the facility accompanied by a delegation of Federation representatives. Their crystalline forms displayed patterns of concern and barely concealed anxiety. The human response to the child trafficking crisis had exceeded all expectations and was beginning to threaten the established order of galactic civilization. "Admiral Webb," Zeth Ka began formally, The Federation Council has asked me to discuss the scope of humanity's current operations. There are concerns about the expansion of your jurisdiction beyond Federation law. Webb's smile was cold. Ambassador, we're operating under the most fundamental law of any civilized society, the protection of children from harm. If Federation law conflicts with that principle, then Federation law is irrelevant. The delegation shifted uncomfortably. This was exactly what they had feared, a human rejection of galactic legal authority in favor of their own moral imperative. Admiral, we understand your commitment to justice, the Altarian delegate interjected, but some of your recent actions have destabilized entire economic sectors. The arrest of corporate executives has caused market crashes in 17 systems. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had witnessed firsthand the damage done to innocent children. With respect, Delegate, market stability built on child slavery deserves to crash. These companies made billions of credits from the suffering of children. If that economic model fails, good. The human position was morally unassailable, but practically devastating. Their investigation had revealed that child labor was so deeply embedded in galactic commerce that removing it threatened to collapse entire industries. Captain Chen presented the delegation with a comprehensive report on their findings. The document revealed a network of exploitation that reached into every sector of galactic civilization. Children had been used in manufacturing, agriculture, mining, construction, entertainment, and research. The profits had been enormous, and the complicity widespread. This isn't just about the Vorthak anymore, Chen explained. This is about a galactic economic system that was built on the exploitation of children. We've found evidence of child labor in 73% of the galaxy's major corporations. The number was staggering. It meant that the majority of galactic civilization's economic prosperity had been built on the suffering of the most vulnerable members of their society. What exactly does humanity propose as a solution? Ambassador Zethka asked, though the distress patterns in their crystalline form suggested they feared the answer. Admiral Webb's response was comprehensive and uncompromising. Complete transparency in all hiring practices, mandatory age verification for all workers, corporate liability for any use of child labor in their supply chains, and most importantly, the establishment of an independent children's protection authority with jurisdiction in all Federation space. The proposal essentially gave humanity oversight authority over every aspect of galactic commerce that involved potential child welfare issues. It was a massive expansion of human influence disguised as child protection legislation. The Federation cannot accept such broad authority being given to any single species, the Epsilon Eridani representative protested. It sets a dangerous precedent for unilateral action. Captain Chen's response cut through the diplomatic language like a blade. The Federation had 1,000 years to prevent the systematic abuse of children. You failed. We won't. The confrontation had reached its inevitable conclusion. Humanity was no longer willing to work within the existing system because that system had proven incapable of protecting children from exploitation. They were prepared to impose their own standards, backed by military force and moral authority that no other species could challenge. The rescued children themselves provided the most powerful argument for humanity's position. As they recovered in the rehabilitation facilities, their resilience and joy demonstrated what could be achieved when young beings were properly protected and nurtured. The contrast with their condition when rescued was stark and undeniable. Young Sarah Martinez, now healthy and smiling, had become an unofficial spokesperson for the rescued children. Her message to the galactic community was simple and devastating. The bad people said nobody cared about us, but the humans proved that somebody always cares about children. The economic disruption caused by humanity's investigation continued to spread throughout the galaxy. Companies that had built their business models on child labor faced bankruptcy. Stock markets crashed as investors fled from any corporation that couldn't prove clean employment practices. Entire industries were forced to restructure their operations. But alongside the economic chaos came unexpected positive changes. Species that had never before considered child welfare issues began implementing their own protection programs. Universities started offering courses in child psychology and development. The galactic community was being forced to confront the reality that civilization's most vulnerable members deserved protection. The Federation Council's final session on the matter took place 6 months after the initial revelation. The chamber was filled with delegates whose worlds had been transformed by humanity's relentless pursuit of child traffickers. Some came bearing gratitude for rescued children. Others came seeking guidance on restructuring their economies. All came with the understanding that the galaxy had fundamentally changed. Admiral Webb's final address to the Council was brief but definitive. Humanity has one simple message for the galaxy. We will never stop protecting children. We will never stop hunting those who hurt them. And we will never forgive those who profit from their suffering. The Children's Protection Authority is now operational with 57 member species and jurisdiction in 73% of Federation space. Our investigation teams continue to locate and rescue trafficked children throughout the galaxy. Our rehabilitation facilities are expanding to accommodate the thousands of victims we're still finding. The Vorthak Consortium is destroyed. Their leadership is imprisoned for life. Their network has been dismantled. But more importantly, we've created a system that will prevent such atrocities from ever happening again. The session ended with the formal establishment of the Children's Protection Treaty, signed by every member species present. The document established universal standards for the treatment of young beings and gave the Protection Authority broad powers to investigate and prosecute violations. As the delegates filed out of the chamber, many reflected on what had been learned. Humanity had entered the galactic community as eager students, willing to adapt and integrate. But when their most fundamental values were threatened, they had shown a capacity for action that had reshaped galactic civilization itself. The rescued children continued to recover and grow in the safety of the rehabilitation facilities. Their laughter echoed through corridors that had been designed specifically to help them heal. They were learning to trust again, to hope again, to believe again that the universe could be a place where children were treasured rather than exploited. And throughout the galaxy, in boardrooms and government chambers, in schools and homes, the message was clear. Humanity would never forgive those who harmed children, and they would never stop protecting the innocent. It was a promise written in the stars, enforced by righteous fury, and guaranteed by a species that had learned to turn their protective instincts into galactic policy. The age of innocence being sacrificed for profit was over. The age of absolute protection for children had begun.